Basically, they say, we can wait this person out. This too shall pass. Very, very big issue. And why do you come up with 35? Notice what each of these executives is honestly saying to the interviewers here. They're telling that interviewer what their critical objectives are in their functional area, whether it's sales, finance, marketing, production. But these companies don't have a shared enterprise vision. And as a result, it almost doesn't matter what their strategy is, because they're not going to be able to execute it coherently. That leads to my first set of diagnostic questions that I'm suggesting. It's just a suggestion that you think about when you leave this conference, and again, to be discussed with colleagues. And you'll see that I'll take this form. Simple scale, 1 to 7. 1 says we're terrible at this. 7 says we're world class. Where do we put ourselves? 1, as a company, how well do we articulate our strategy in ways that our customer contact personnel, sales, service, understand and respond to? Hopefully we're better than that research I showed you a little earlier about how many employees in most companies don't have a clue what their company's strategy is. 2, how well do we specify in our strategy discussions where we do and don't play in our markets? I don't know if you can see this with the lighting, but the truth is I'm balding. I don't know how apparent that is. One of the few virtues of getting older is that I can say with some confidence that I've probably run as many strategy meetings as most people. And let me tell you, over 30 years, I can count on the fingers of my hands the number of strategy documents that even make reference to what is supposed to go on in the field, let alone specify actionably where we will and won't play with customers. How well do we do that is the second question. How well do we discuss the implementation requirements with the relevant set of cross-functional managers so that we don't have 5 most critical objectives, but a manageable list? And then last but not least, how well do we clear the implications of our business strategy for selling objectives, behaviors, and metrics? If you do follow up on my discussion, a couple of suggestions about what you might talk about, the dialogue you might have with your colleagues. Which item receives the highest score? Why? Can you cite an example? But then, which item receives the lowest score and why? And for those items that come down toward the bottom, what should we do about it? You know, Douglas introduced me. I was an academic, then I ran a business, then I'm an academic again. You understand the difference between what I now do again for a living and what you do? I actually get paid to say, you should do X. You get paid for doing it. And unfortunately, that's a tougher job, right? But as they say in the gangster movies, you chose this life. You should have become an underpaid, struggling professor. So what do we do about it? What action should we start, stop, or do differently? And then, and this is important, what should sales expect from other functions? What should other functions expect from sales? All right? Important issue. Are we on the same page? Shared vision. All right, let me say a few things about the topic of pricing. And let me warn you that what I'm about to cover in the next few minutes is very, very basic. Very basic. But, and I say this with respect, but what I have learned in working with lots of companies, for reasons I don't quite understand, I'm sure some psychologists can explain this, but what I have discovered is that even the best companies, even the best executives, somehow in the hustle and bustle of business lose sight of these basics, all right? So I want to inoculate what I'm about to cover here. The red part of this chart is your fully burdened cost, including your opportunity cost of capital, your fully burdened cost for doing whatever it is you do in your business to get the product or service from wherever you produce it to whoever buys it and uses it. All right, that's what that red bar is about. Comment number 1. It is not a good idea to sell below cost. All right? Now, you're giggling, but I'm going to say that again. It is not a good idea to sell below cost. And one of the things that I am continually astounded by in working with companies is how smart people can rationalize selling below cost. And in fact, in recent years, because of the internet and consumer media, there's a whole group of gurus. You may have met some of them at sales conferences, for all I know, but a whole group of gurus that in effect preach selling below cost. And whenever I hear that, I'm reminded, there's a comment, Peter Drucker. I mentioned Peter Drucker to my students last year, and they thought I was talking about Julius Caesar, but I hope I can, mention Peter Drucker to you, the great management consultant for decades. Peter Drucker was once interviewed, and the interviewer asked Drucker, said, "Mr. Drucker, how does it feel to be a management guru?" And Drucker said, "Do you know why business people call them gurus? Because it's easier to spell than charlatan." All right, so that's how you've got to keep this in mind. It is not a good idea to sell below cost. So obviously cost, fully burdened cost, in a rational pricing strategy should set the floor. What's going to set the ceiling? The ceiling is going to be set by the customer's perception of value. That's going to set their top part of their willingness to pay. And obviously price should float somewhere in between, and I'm using standard negotiating terminology here, the so-called ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. Now the difference between price and our cost is called profit. I think that's pretty straightforward, right? And that's obviously the driving force for any supplier to sell. What's interesting here is that the difference between customer perceived value and price does not have a commonly agreed upon term in the business lexicon. Economists call that consumer surplus, but I don't think it's a coincidence that that economic jargon has never caught on in business, because surplus makes it sound like, it's discretionary, philanthropic, a nice thing to do. Most of you are in sales. I hope and assume I don't have to convince you of this, but I dare you to try to sell something at a price that's equal to the number the customer values it at. The odds are overwhelming that you will not succeed. The definition of a deal, the definition of value from the customer's point of view, is the difference between what they value it at and what they pay for it. So I'm calling that difference customer benefits. Now, why am I going over these basics? I'm going over these basics for the following reasons. I've been involved in lots and lots of pricing discussions in my career, and the vast majority of them go something like this. Times is tough. There's a recession out there. Who the hell knows what's going to happen in Europe and China, let alone the United States? Maybe we can shave a few points off our cost of goods sold and preserve our margins that way. Or conversely, at the top, I think there are certain segments here that value this product or service more than others. And I'm going to go say something about that in a few minutes. And maybe we can keep price there while we have to discount there. Now, those are not irrelevant discussions. That's called continuous improvement. And any company needs to do that. But the real opportunities for profitable growth, that 9% that the Bain people found, the real opportunities for profitable growth are increasing the ZOPA, increasing the zone of possible agreement, either by doing something that leads the customer to value this more, and I believe Jeff will be speaking about this on Wednesday, or conversely, by figuring out another business model that shifts that red block, that shifts our fully burdened cost, whether it's through channel management, or digital X, Y, or Z, or a different business model for going to market. Notice in order to do that, in order to shift the ZOPA, it can't just be a sales discussion on the one hand or a theoretical strategy discussion on the other. There has to be both going on. Now, let me go a little bit further with this and get a little more specific and tactical about this issue. What a customer is always doing, whether it knows it or not, when it buys a product or service, a customer is buying into three types of costs: acquisition, possession, and usage costs. Acquisition costs are the costs of acquiring that product or service. And most visibly and obviously, that includes the price. What do I pay for this thing? But that's only one element of acquisition costs. Other elements are what you might call the administrivia involved in the purchase: the cost of paperwork, the cost of shopping for the product and ancillary services, parts, etc., the costs of expediting the order. Notice that those items, 2, 3, 4, etc., have been real focuses of innovation in the business world over the last 10 to 15 years. I think it's a bit of exaggeration to say that IT and the internet have shrunk those costs to zero, but they've dramatically lowered those costs, right? And as a result, notice what the logic is here. A supplier, a seller that can do a good job on those other items can remain a lower acquisition cost supplier even at a premium price. And that logic flows through this little framework. Possession costs, the costs of keeping the product or service available for use. That's what just-in-time inventory management was originally aimed at addressing. But quite obviously, over the last 2 decades, just-in-time has become much more than an inventory management tool. It's become an entire philosophy for how you think about organizing and running the business. And then lastly, usage costs. What does it cost the customer to actually use this product or service where it is consumed or used? Quality makes a difference. What are the issues with defects? Product design makes a difference. Is this going to involve a lot of training or a little training? And number 18 on this illustrative example, especially in categories, and there are more and more of them these days, where environmental issues are important, disposal costs will make a difference. And the logic here, the way you're asked to think about this, is that the smart buyer and the smart seller understands what these items are in this business and doesn't just focus on A, but on how all of these add up. Now, let me give you an example, because as usual, an example is worth any number of frameworks. One of the companies that I think is best at doing this is a company in the medical equipment business called Becton Dickinson and Company. I don't know how many of you may be familiar with Becton Dickinson. They're headquartered in New Jersey in the United States, but they're a global firm. Their main product is hypodermic needles and syringes. Now, I do not want to call Becton's products commodities. One of the things I have learned in my career is that executives get very touchy when you call their product a commodity. So I have worked with Becton. I want to continue to work with Becton. If you ever meet someone from Becton, make sure you tell them what Frank did and did not say. All right, that's the deal. So let me put it to you this way. I dare you to get stuck by one of their needles and one of their competitors' needles and tell me the difference. All right? Becton's market share in that category is in excess of 65% in North America and Europe, not in Asia. In excess of 65%. They sell their products at a 40% price premium versus the price of their major competitor, which is a Japanese firm called Terumo Corporation. And in the last 10 years, Becton has gained 12 points of market share. Do you understand the situation I'm describing? This is strategy heaven, right? We have a dominant share, a premium price, and we're gaining share. How do we make sense of this? It only makes sense if both the seller and the buyer in that product category happen to understand the importance, in this case, of item 18, disposal costs. Needles and syringes come into contact with patients' blood in hospitals and commercial laboratories. Think about the impact of an infectious disease like AIDS on disposal costs. There are other issues, but just think about the impact of that one disease. In the United States and many other countries, the cost of disposing of what they call the sharps, the used needles and syringes, is easily 40 times the cost of buying them in the first place, and it's monitored in the US by the Environmental Protection Agency. In other words, if you do something wrong in disposing those things, they can shut you down. It's a franchise risk, all right? Now, what does the Becton salesperson do? They're a bit more polite than I'm going to be, but this is the basic value proposition. They walk into hospitals and basically say, look, right now in a 300-400 bed hospital, you can have anywhere from 12 to 24 people who go around from room to room, because these needles are used everywhere, wearing about 3 nylon latex gloves on each hand. And all they do is dispose of the used needles. And you're afraid and they're afraid that, God forbid, there should be an accidental needle stick with an infected needle. What else is Becton selling besides needles? They're basically selling product liability insurance, right? Here's what we will do, says the Becton account manager. You should outsource that entire activity to us. Because of our distribution system, because of our service network, basically because of our economies of scale and scope, we can handle that activity much more efficiently and economically than you can. And by the way, if you do that and you then find that you no longer have a use for those 12 to 24 people, well, either A, you can reallocate them to other tasks, or you can do what you want with those 12 to 24 people. That's your business. Are you getting the attention of an increasingly cost-strapped hospital administrator? Then, says the Becton salesperson, all we ask in return for this generosity is that you sign this 5, 6, 7-year contract for this volume of needles at this price. And if, in fact, the buyer understands that it's a good deal economically. Now, let me just take this a step further, all right, because that's what you have to do in sales. In hospitals, at least in the United States, there is a creature called the materials manager. In many other businesses, we call this creature the purchasing agent. And basically, they keep the materials manager in a cage, and when a salesperson walks into the hospital, they open the front of the cage, and this creature comes down and goes, that sort of thing. What do you think happens when the Becton salesperson comes in with the value proposition I just outlined and speaks to the purchasing manager? How many of you have ever been on a sales call like that, right? Where the buyer sort of says, yawns, looks at his or her watch and says, can we get serious here? I mean, do you have the rugby tickets or don't you? That sort of thing. If this is the way you're going to sell, who must you be speaking with in an account like that? Very obviously a much more senior executive. In this case, the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. Does the CFO understand this? The answer is yes. I understand what you're telling me, but, says the CFO, I don't believe you. I simply don't believe that you can save me that much money in this commodity product category. And what the Becton account manager says, and I am proud to say we taught them to say this, what the Becton account manager says is, look, don't believe us. Let's go to a neutral third party. Let's go to one of the public accounting firms, and let's do what, in their jargon, they call an activity-based costing study. Are you familiar with this jargon from the accounting firms? The real economic costs of engaging in an activity in an organization. And we'll split the costs of that study 50-50. We'll put up 50%, you put up 50%. And what you will find 10 times out of 10 is that A, you had no idea how much money you were spending on disposal costs for this product. And when you do find out, you're going to see that this is a pretty good deal. So what are the lessons of this if you're going to sell value and not price? One of the lessons is obviously you better have the value. B, you better be speaking to the right people. And C, it's not good enough to say, trust me. We have to have some credible demonstration of that value. Now, what I hope you don't leave the conference thinking is, well, that's an interesting theoretical idea from some professoroni, because this is not an interesting theoretical idea. This is tangible value, right? What I've got on this slide is the classic equation for calculating return on equity for a company. It's called the DuPont equation. Don't ask me why it's called the DuPont equation. I have no idea. Something happened at DuPont in the early 20s, and they came up with this, and this is the way it's been done for a century. ROE is profit margins, profit divided by sales, times asset turnover, sales divided by assets, times, in a public company, the financial leverage, assets to equity. Now, this last item is really not relevant to what I just went through. This last item we leave to the geniuses, he said sarcastically, in finance and investment banking to manage, right? They've demonstrated in the last 5 years how smart they are with leverage, right? They're clearly really sharp. But notice that the other 2/3 of ROE is affected by selling like this. What's value from the customer's perspective? It's helping them improve their margins, either by reducing their costs or giving them something that allows them to differentiate their product or service and charge a higher price, or simply making them a better business, process improvements. The other component of value, and these are obviously not mutually exclusive, is helping customers improve their asset turnover, either by making them more capable of managing their working capital more efficiently and effectively. By the way, what the global recession has done has dramatically increased the visibility and the importance of working capital management. If you have trouble getting a bank loan, working capital management is called life or death. You want to check that out if you're involved in B2B sales. Or we help them improve asset turnover by reducing or eliminating the assets that are required, right? That's what Becton's doing with hospitals around the world. Or by process outsourcing and giving them balance sheet benefits. They can raise money and use it in other areas of the business. What are some of the key issues if this is important to the way you sell? Right? I suspect most of you do not attend a sales conference in order to learn how to sell on price and discount. If you need a seminar about that, you can meet me outside for 5 minutes. I'll show you how to do that, all right? Most of you attend here in order to preserve price or increase it, to sell value. What are the key issues? Incentives and metrics. If you're going to go to market this way, you're ultimately about maximizing profits, not just volume. And then you have to take a good hard look at what you're really measured on in sales in your organization. Train salespeople in negotiation and access to the right buyers. And now's the time to do that before, God hopes, there really is a sustained recovery. Institute regular and disciplined account management reviews. Most of the maybe I've just got all the lemon companies in the world in my career, but I doubt it. I mean, you heard the names. I mean, some of these people are not half bad, but really, account management reviews in most companies is a bit of a farce, isn't it? I mean, you know, if you sold more, you get an attaboy, right? You get a pat on the back. And then if you didn't make your numbers, you know, what's the basic modus operandi? Let's find a human sacrifice. Who do we shoot for this? That's helpful, isn't it? How many of you are familiar with what armies in various nations call after-action reviews? If you're not familiar, there's just good short articles about this. Find out about them. It's a smart, disciplined process that you will see is essentially a better way of doing what in sales we call a win-loss analysis. It's a good model for making account reviews useful, right? Cost products and services and orders accurately. One of the ways you bring strategy and sales together is to have people in accounting who can do this. Look for incremental value and price opportunities constantly. Most big numbers in business are ultimately the aggregation of smaller numbers. And then last but not least, always remember that value differs by customer segment and application. And let me give you what I think is an example that will help make this point. When I started teaching at Harvard Business School, during my first tour of duty there, before I left and actually ran a business, we used to teach a wonderful case study about a new product that DuPont produced. It's called Alathon Pipe, and it's a better product. The product decreased the mean time between failure, as they say, by 75%, from an average of 8% to 2%. But when you study the case, when you analyze it, what you come to realize is that the real innovations at DuPont took place after R&D was finished. It took place in their go-to-market. And basically the same pipe, same product, same package is sold at a certain price for above-ground irrigation applications, but at a very different price by the time you got to toxic waste sites. They would not let the case writer put in the actual prices in the case study, so all you get is indexes, but you can see the index for above-ground irrigation is 100. By the time you get to toxic waste sites, they're selling the same pipe, same product, same package for 450% more. Why? I mean, clearly one of the reasons is the cost of failure in these different applications, right? If the pipe breaks in an industrial waste site, what's at stake? Very obviously what's at stake is, the costs of doing that with all of the environmental issues. I don't think I need to remind you about this in South Africa, but if this happens and it's visible and you're the CEO of that company, you too can spend a wonderful afternoon testifying to Congress or someone else in government. How much is it worth to you to avoid that? On the other hand, in above-ground irrigation applications, if the pipe leaks, you call it a leak, I call it irrigation. Right? You can see the difference here. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing this is that clearly this is this is at one end of the spectrum, this 450% difference. But, and there's good research to support this, if you look at most companies' installed customer bases, let alone new customer acquisition, there is a similar dispersion of value. And ultimately, in my book, that's part of what sales gets paid for. Part of what sales gets paid for is to understand and keep current those different measures and perceptions of value by segment, by customer, by application, etc. There's a lot of money to be made in understanding this and mining this. All right, pricing and value dialogue. A couple of questions to consider when you leave here. How well do we understand what our customers do and, equally important, do not value in product, in service, in support? That may be 3 separate questions, depending on your business. I'm not sure. How well do we continuously update our understanding of value drivers by customer segment? You understand, again, the difference between what I now do for a living, now that I'm back in academia, and what you do. When I'm back at Harvard, I spend most of my time teaching case studies. Case studies, by definition, are about stuff that's already happened. They're about the past. It is amazing how smart I am about the past. I am brilliant about the past. That is not what you get paid for. You don't get paid to manage the past. You get paid to manage today and tomorrow. And again, I admit that's a tougher job. How well do we continuously update this understanding. How well do we discuss and manage our total value proposition? Acquisition, possession, usage costs. How well do we do it internally? And then with the customer. And let me guarantee you this. If you don't do it internally, in sales and with other functions, it's not going to happen with the customer. Charity and value begin at home. And then last but not least, how well do we reflect and manage the relevant value drivers in the execution of our sales, marketing, product, supply chain, and other cross-functional programs? And again, if you do this, if you take the time to do this, and obviously I think it's valuable, you might organize your dialogue around this set of questions, which you'll see are the same for each and every topic I cover. All right? All right, let me go on to the third item, and that is, does the sales force win the right deals? Let me explain what this seemingly complicated chart looks like. I want you to think about what happens in most companies when a sale is made. Let us hope that, it's 9:15 in the morning. Let's hope that somewhere, right now, as we speak, in South Africa, somebody's closed a sale, all right? The first thing that happens, if that salesperson has any kind of commission basis, is they do that version of what you see in sports, right? They're going to go, yeah, or as you do in South Africa, I still can't do it without hurting my thumb, this sort of thing. We did it. We made that sale. The second thing that happens is a domino effect throughout the business system of the selling company. What a sale always represents to the seller is a stream of orders that comes in to the company. And that order stream is always characterized by what economists call transaction costs. Some of those orders are orders you can fulfill in your sleep. They're for standard items, they're in inventory. We do this every day, 7 days a week, right? And then there are other orders that are going to be customized to some extent. They're not standard items. They may involve a new design. They may involve, shifting the production line or whatever. So if you move up on the left side of this chart, a sale and the order it represents has implications for product mix, what capacity in our product line we do or don't utilize with that sale, and it has implications for throughput. In a manufacturing firm, if that's where you live, throughput is what happens in the factory. On the other hand, if you think sales or a professional services firm, throughput is about people. It's about human resources. It's about what sorts of people and skills are and are not utilized. Now let's go to the bottom and the right. Maintaining a customer is not free. There are customer maintenance costs and one hopes revenues, right? Now if you add those two things up, they're going to say something about the profitability and cumulative cash flow of that customer relationship. So the first thing that happens when a sale is made, some salesperson legitimately feels better. But the second thing is this domino effect throughout the business model or business system of the seller. The point is who we sell to and what orders they represent is a pretty important decision in any company. But I'd ask you to think about how do most companies manage that decision? And the answer, I think, if you look at sales compensation plans, is that basically they don't. Basically, what the sales comp plan says to salespeople, and by the way, those of you who are sales managers here, unless you're really doing a bad job hiring, in my experience, most salespeople, it takes them about 48, maximum 72 hours to figure out what the incentives are in their sales comp plan, even though you try to obfuscate it with lots of slides. So the issue is not taxing their little brains. If this is how you eat, you will figure it out, and they do. But most sales comp plans basically say to salespeople a variation on the old biblical aphorism, go forth and multiply. And that's exactly what salespeople do. And as they multiply, what are they doing? They're bringing in a whole diversity of different order streams into the company with very different implications for product mix, throughput, post-sale customer maintenance. Notice what happens. What happens over time is that in a very real sense, it almost doesn't matter what you think your strategy is. It's irrelevant. The real strategy is the aggregate orders that our sales force has generated. And that, by the way, is how companies tend to get stuck in the middle. Not because they don't understand that it's probably a good idea to have a strategy, but because of what happens in execution. Now, how can we improve this? First of all, let me just underline what I've already said. This is a key strategic decision. Doing this well requires clarity about some of the things we've already covered, customer value, strategy, where we do and don't play. It requires internal communication and aligned visions. Why is it a bad idea to have 35 top 5 objectives? Not because executives have to work harder. Who cares about that? That's what they get paid for. But because it hurts strategy execution. What it also requires, however, is what I want to spend a few moments on, the ability to distinguish between and manage what I'm going to call transaction versus relationship customers and projects. Now, let me explain what I want to do here, because I'm then going to ask you I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I'm actually going to ask you to vote in relation to this question. Most companies, and by most I mean in excess of 90%, when they look at the possible places they could sell in their market, are basically looking at what I'll call a spectrum of opportunities. Do you understand the basic metaphor I'm trying to get across here? My high school physics at this age has gotten rusty, but what I remember from high school physics when we studied the radio wave spectrum was the acronym Roy G. Biv. I don't know if you're taught that, red, orange, yellow, green. I always wondered, will I meet somebody named Roy G. Biv? I mean, it hasn't happened yet. But the point is that along the spectrum, the colors shade into each other, but where you end up with is very different than where you began. Most companies, when they're looking at where they could sell, are looking at a spectrum. I'm going to call one end of the spectrum transaction buyers, basically buying in what is fundamentally a spot market. The other end of the spectrum, relationship buyers, if you want to call them value buyers, that's fine, buying in what I will call a solutions market. Now, obviously, most customers are going to be some hybrid along the spectrum, but I want us to focus on the two ends of the spectrum to make the basic point. What characterizes the transaction buyer? By definition, that buyer is adopting a short time horizon when they purchase in that category. Probably the ultimate transaction buyer in industry is someone on a commodities or futures exchange in Chicago or Frankfurt, you know, the people that trade coffee futures and pork bellies, etc. On the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the traders have a saying that perfectly captures the nature of the business. And the saying is, long term is after lunch, right? Long term is after lunch. And why is that so reflective of the realities of the business? It's a very, very efficient market. If there's a frost in Brazil, as soon as that information is known, the coffee future market can change like that. So how do you make money in a business like that? You don't make it by spending a lot of time and training on relationships. I don't think commodities traders have a reputation for being, particularly relationship oriented. Go to a commodities floor and look at it. It's about sharp elbows, screaming, no, get the hell out of the way. I mean, that's just the nature of the business. And it's the nature of the business because there may not be a long term, right? The market may change like this. So how do you make money? You play the spread. If the price looks good at a certain point, you sell or buy. Why does the business work that way? Because buyers make very, very small investments in specialized procedures or assets. Your grain looks like her grain, looks like his grain. As a result, they incur very low switching costs, and they're not particularly interested in those wider system benefits, acquisition, possession, usage costs. What those buyers are basically buying is a product's price performance at a given point in time. Now, this is easily misunderstood. This does not mean those buyers are not interested in quality. What it does mean is that once the product reaches their specified level of quality and performance, they're not interested in paying another rand to have it, quote, over-engineered. When you're selling in that kind of market, the kind of organizational coordination issues I've talked about is, quite frankly, a relatively minor sales requirement. Just get it done. The other end of the spectrum, relationship buyers. They're adopting a longer time horizon when they buy in that category. Not because they have a different genetic structure, but because there's something about the product. Until relatively recently, enterprise software was the classic example. You know, why does no one ever get fired, as they say, for buying Oracle or SAP? Because when you buy historically, before the cloud, in that market, you're not just buying the product. Whether you like it or not, you're buying into a multi-year partnership with that company. So you want to know, are they going to be here a few years from now? What does their balance sheet look like? Are they committed to product innovation in that category, et cetera, et cetera? So there's something about the product, or there's something about the seller, or there's something about the buyer, maybe a change in their business model, that is encouraging, in fact, maybe even requiring them to make larger investments in specialized procedures. And once they make them, they're not easily fungible, to use the economic term. They do incur switching costs, and as a result, they are indeed interested in those wider system benefits of acquisition, possession, usage costs. These people are buying products, but it's not just rhetoric to say they're also buying a partner and its organization. And as a result, organizational coordination is a major sales requirement at that end of the spectrum. Now, has everybody got the basic contrast that I've outlined here? Here's the question, and I'm going to ask you to vote on this. Very simple question. Who is the good customer? How many of you say the good customer is the transaction buyer? Can I see a show of hands about that? Oh, salespeople. And how many of you say the good customer is the relationship buyer in the solution market? Can I see a show of hands about that? And the rest of you are not in sales. You're in finance or accounting or some other overhead function. Is that correct? Okay. When I ask companies around the world this question, it's more or less the same percentage. I usually get a bit more than zero about transaction, but it's usually easily 70 to 80% about relationship. Why? Anybody want to articulate why they vote for the right end of the spectrum, assuming we can be heard in the room? What's attractive about selling at the right end? If there is such a thing as customer loyalty in business, big if, where are we more likely to find it? With the transaction or the relationship buyer? Okay. Where is price likely to be higher? With the transaction or relationship buyer? All right. Now, let's flip this. Where is the selling cycle, and therefore selling general and administrative costs, likely to be higher? With transaction or relationship buyer? Right? If, remember that little figure I have about what happens when you make a sale, where are the costs of customization likely to be higher? Transaction or relationship buyer? Right? The correct answer to my question, who's the good customer, is it depends, it can be both. But, and if you take nothing else away from my session, please take this away. This is one of those areas of business where it is very, very important to be right for the right reasons. Because if you're right for the wrong reason, basically you're going to be selling below cost and congratulating yourself for doing it. All right? Here's the difference, in my view, between success and failure in customer management. Whatever else sales is about, it's certainly about customer management. Success is knowing who we're really selling to, not who we think we're selling to, but who we're really selling to, and then aligning our sales program and resources appropriately. When we have those relationship opportunities, that's where the repeated sales calls, the repeated requests for proposal, the customization are worth it. On the other hand, can you think of companies that have made a very good living selling primarily or only to transaction opportunities? There are hundreds of them. What's the key there? The key there is to take the costs out of the system. And at the extreme, at the margin, maybe taking selling costs out of the system. Do we need salespeople there, or is this an online transaction? That's success. Failure comes in two flavors, what statisticians call type A and type B errors. Type A error is approaching what is fundamentally a transaction opportunity with an expensive, service-intensive relationship sales program. What is it that customers do what is it that transaction customers do when you do that? Do they chase your salespeople away? Unfortunately, the answer is no. In fact, they would be doing you a big economic benefit if they chased your salespeople away. Instead, what they basically say is, tell me more. You know, you folks are terrific. You are the class act in your industry. The way you responded to my request for proposal, absolute genius, work of art. In fact, I thought your response was so smart that I shared it with my other vendors because I felt they could learn something from this. Now notice, this is not a moral issue, right? There's no moral issue involved here. Any customer, any rational customer will and should take anything for free. And that's what happens when you're committing type A error. Type B error is the opposite. Approaching what is fundamentally a relationship opportunity with a fragmented piece part transaction sales program. Now notice, for type A error, in my experience, even companies that can't spell finance usually have financial systems in place that let them know when they're committing type A error. It's called losing money. It's a direct cost. Type B error, on the other hand, is an opportunity cost. And no one has yet developed a cash register or an accounting general register to calculate opportunity costs. One of the questions I'll ask you to consider when you leave here, and I'll use an arbitrary time frame, let's say the remainder of 2012, 2013. That's, what is that, about 15 months. Given your company strategy and sales program, which of these two mistakes are you more likely to make? And don't tell me you don't make these mistakes, for two reasons. One reason, as my mother liked to say, it's not nice to lie, right? But the second reason is that a company that's not making a certain number of these mistakes, in my opinion, is not serious enough about profitable growth. Business is not about perfection. Business is not about statistically significant this or that. Leave that to the academics. Business is about learning by doing. It's about minimizing the number of times we do the things on the bottom part of this chart and learning from each and every one. That's why win-loss analyses are so important. And then maximizing the number of times we do the top part of the chart. So which of these mistakes, because every company will have a central tendency given their culture, etc. All right? Again, you're going, as Douglas said, you'll get all of these slides here. I don't think I need to go through these in any detail, but these are some of the questions about the opportunity management dialogue that you might consider with your peers, with your leadership teams in your companies when you leave the Think Sales conference. And again, some of the ways to move from interesting discussion to action there. Fourth and final topic, productivity. Do continuously improve sales productivity and enable better customer management. This is the way I think about sales productivity. It's the, pardon the jargon, the multiplicative function of three things. One is capacity. By sales capacity, I don't simply mean how many feet on the street do we have. I mean fundamentally, what's the capacity up here of our salespeople? What are they capable of? What are they not capable of? Like the Becton salespeople, can they make that higher C-suite call, or are they afraid of that? Right? Those sorts of things are what I mean by capacity. What is going to increase sales capacity? One way to increase sales capacity is to get people to work harder. Now, what you're supposed to say when you attend a conference and hear a professor is, oh, it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you what the research says. It's also about working harder. Think about it this way. If you can get your sales force to make one more real sales call per day, that's 5 per week, 20 per month, 240 per year. What the research says is you're going to shake something from that tree. So do not look down your nose at somebody who works the extra, whatever it is, hours. But it's also about working smarter, more focus on the high impact tasks. The second element is close rate. Capacity is where we're calling. Close rate is we're not just calling, are we closing sales? There you increase close rate by doing a better job with opportunity management, but also with better account management. And if we're going to deal with both transaction and relationship buyers, channel management. And then the third issue is the money we do or don't make. Not only do we close a sale, what kind of sale do we close? And here the basics are relevant. Better pricing, the product, but also lowering our selling costs and internal process efficiencies. We've got sessions in this conference that are about digital selling. This is an important issue. And about other areas. Technology is not the scarce resource in the early 21st century. It's basically understanding how to use and not misuse it in sales organizations that is the scarce resource. Couple of questions for you to consider about this productivity dialogue. I'm just going to focus on the last one, managing the strategy to sales performance cycle on an ongoing basis, and not just once and then letting it sort of mold for the next 3 to 5 years. Here's what I mean by that cycle. It does begin with strategy. If you don't have a strategy, it's awfully tough to figure out, are we doing a good job selling or not? All we know is we're selling. Strategy is about setting the direction in actionable terms. Then we need to set measures and target behaviors. What is that about? What are metrics fundamentally about? It's about translating the direction into mutual performance expectations. Then there's planning and executing, triggering the actions required to achieve performance expectations. This is what most sales managers spend most of their lives with. Then there's monitoring and evaluating. Is this going to work or not? Let's make sure we don't commit what accountants call the sunk cost fallacy, throwing good money after bad. And then rewarding and coaching, aligning behavior with the performance expectations. And I have these circles because obviously value is created or destroyed in the external marketplace. It's not created or destroyed in what you do in the meeting you'll ever have at your company. And the market will do what the market will do. It is not the responsibility of the market to understand your strategy and be nice to it. It's the responsibility of managers to figure out what the hell is going on out there and do something about it.